Minnesota, yes, we're talking to you. Please go win the Big Ten now. You can do it. All right. 8-2 in week 1 for the Big 12. Good showing, or look at the games, really maybe no showing. Bob Stoops, another round with his beloved SEC, and it's, of course, Oklahoma-Tennesse week, the biggest Big 12 game of the season. Maybe. All right. Big 12 breakdown. It's a Wednesday night. It's 9 o'clock Eastern and 8 Central. So this is your place to be if you love Big 12 football. We talk it up for 30 minutes at least every Wednesday night and bring on the best bloggers talking Big 12 football and only football each and every Wednesday. You can catch us live on Google Hangouts, recorded version on YouTube, or if you just want to listen to us and can't stand watching me for 30 minutes, then you just listen to the podcast on Podbean or various SB Nation sites as well. So we've got our distinguished panel of Melissa Triebwasser, Frogs of War on TCU. We've got Robert Whetsell making an appearance here from Cowboys Ride for Free, and of course Sean Cordy from 2 Days U. So we do have some Big 12 headlines. Despite it being kind of a calm week 1, everything goes as expected for the most part on the field. Suddenly the fallout comes at Texas, coming off 6-7, coming off some ugly losses against the better teams. Wow, 38-3 against Notre Dame. Everybody expected a loss, but I expected Texas to go up there and compete, play a little bit better, keep it within 2 touchdowns. I think everybody in the Big 12 nation would have been happy with that kind of showing out of Texas in representing the conference. Robert, we'll start with you because Texas has now made the move to demote the co-offensive coordinators, make a bold move here, 1 game into the season. Just kind of your thoughts about where Texas stands right now.
It just boggles my mind that a university with the resources that Texas has, the national recognition that Texas has, even as of 5 years ago, still just a tremendous advantage that Texas has in recruiting the state of Texas, that a program could fall really to the point that they could have trouble staying ahead of Kansas out of the basement this season, if you could believe that. I mean, guys, you can chime in there, but I mean, they looked, unless Notre Dame's way better than we think they are, they looked horrendous. I mean, that looked almost Kansas bad, folks.
To put it in perspective, Corey Coleman had more receiving yards on 5 receptions than Texas's whole offense. And I think Tyron Stoops had 7 completed passes on 22 passes. It's just looking terrible, like you said. I don't see how this is getting. Maybe Notre Dame is that good, but I don't know.
To take the big picture view real quick and kind of tag on to what Robert had to say, you're looking at a program that went to the national championship game in 2009, and the 3 quarterbacks that led the offense just prior to getting to the national championship, Colt McCoy, Major Applewhite, Vince Young. There were Texas quarterbacks that could produce and were great players. And now we're going on 6 seasons, 7 seasons with no playmakers at quarterback, nobody that can run an offense, nobody that's dynamic, nobody that's a great pocket passer, nothing at quarterback. They haven't recruited there or developed there. And now if we grind it down just to this particular team, it's very, very ugly. So I know, Melissa, you're not shedding any tears, but this is how Texas football looks in 2015.
Well, it's really interesting to me because at the end of the day, I don't know if Texas is Kansas bad because what Texas has is still Texas talent, and Kansas doesn't have the name recruits that Texas has signed. But if you look at it, I think it comes down to one of 2 things. Either every scouting service has missed on every recruit that's been signed there for the last 4 years, which doesn't seem likely, or those players just aren't buying into Charlie Strong's system. And while I do think Notre Dame probably is pretty darn good, I don't know if they are embarrassing Notre Dame on opening night good. That remains to be seen clearly. But what you have is a coach who's come in who is a complete opposite of what Mac Brown was, who is not a player's guy, who is a complete total discipline guy, which, I think we all respect the heck out of. But at the end of the day, his players aren't playing to their full potential. And is that because they just aren't as good as we thought they were, or is that because they just haven't bought into what he's trying to do. And I'm starting to lean towards it being the latter. And Texas isn't exactly known as being a patient program, so that seat is getting really, really hot under Charlie Strong.
Well,
Yeah,
and I think, too, if I could throw this in,
sure.
I think not just Strong, but you throw in the turmoil with Patterson, all right? There was a tremendous amount of Twitter conversation today revolving around Patterson's seat being hotter than Charlie Strong's, and then a lot of people still trying to look back for blame. So a lot of folks trying to look back at Mac Brown and saying, well, Mac really wasn't that great of a deal. He inherited players from Matt Makovic, who was there before him. So there's just so much right now within the program, and I think you're absolutely right, Melissa, with the lack of patience they've traditionally had. This is just a boiling cauldron of dumpster fire, and I don't know how this is going to play out. I mean, it's a crapshoot from all angles.
And that's where it hurts to possibly be Texas, because if you hire the right guy at Oklahoma State, or the guy that you believe to be the right guy, you can put up with 6-7, and maybe it's going to be 5-7 or 6-6 this year. And if you truly believe in the guy and what he's doing, then you can weather that, and the fans don't like it, but it's not that big a deal. We've been there before, and you make it through, and maybe you turn out to have the coach. But Charlie Strong obviously needs to win at some level this season, you would think.
Well, and the other thing with Strong is he wasn't exactly their first choice. I mean, they went hard after Saban, and that didn't work out. And they went hard after a couple other names, and that didn't work out. And Strong was kind of seen as plan B, C, D, F by a lot of the fans, and possibly by some of the administration. And I agree with you, Robert, too, on Patterson. Like, that's been just a disaster. But knowing his track record, I don't know what they really expected to get out of him from the beginning anyway. But, I don't think that the fans were looking for Charlie Strong to be the answer. And so, very early into the Charlie Strong era, things aren't working out. I just don't know how much leash they're going to give him in Austin.
Hey, Melissa, let's stay with you, because we'll switch it from Texas to TCU, and what has come out today and been kind of clarified.
So we've had some breaking news come down here within about the last hour. James McFarland, who was TCU's leading sack maker a year ago, is now out for the season. He broke a toe on a sprinkler a few weeks back. He's been in a walking boot. It was expected he would play on Saturday against SFA. He's now headed for surgery. So more than likely, it looks like he's done for the year. I believe it's his senior season, too. So we're probably looking at a medical red shirt, hopefully, for him, so he gets another chance. The other more surprising news is that Mike Freeze, who started as a true freshman at linebacker and played very, very well against Minnesota, has taken a personal leave of absence. And the reasons for that are unclear, but he's left the team, and you're now looking at 9 first-time starters if you don't include the 2015 season on defense for TCU on Saturday. So linebacker position was already thin. We're moving a guy who had been a linebacker that moved to fullback back to linebacker. 2 safeties are moving from that position to the linebacker position. By all accounts, it seems that we're going to see Montrell Wilson get his first ever collegiate start. I believe he's a redshirt freshman. And then also Ty Summers, who filled in when TCU starting linebacker Sammy Douglas, who was also the only linebacker who had ever played a snap at that position for TCU, went down after, I believe, the first series in Minnesota. So we all think Gary Patterson's a defensive genius. We're about to find out.
So, Melissa, before we came on the air, the way you sat down and approached the whole deal, and you were frantic, and I saw your tweets and everything else, this isn't a situation where I'm sure a lot of people are out there thinking, big deal, TCU, they got other players, they plug them in, they keep going. You're sincerely a little bit nervous about the defense.
I'm legitimately concerned, and not because I don't believe in Gary Patterson's ability to build a great defense, but mostly because you're talking about, I believe now we are looking at a total of 32 career starts among the starting defensive players. That's just not a lot. And I don't know if you guys would agree with me or not, but the Big 12 is kind of an offensive conference.
Oh, so, no, for sure.
Just barely. So when the Frogs come out and they're only able to put 23 points on the board, mind you, against a good Minnesota team on the road, but now they've lost their entire linebacking core, and the defensive line is already thin. Losing McFarland, you've got Pearson's already dinged up, a couple other players dinged up. You're starting only 2 guys in the backfield in Derek Kindred, who's hurt, playing hurt, and the sophomore Anthony Tejada. That's basically your experience right now. So we're looking at almost a whole new defensive line from a starting perspective this Saturday, as well as a whole new linebacking core, some guys who've never even played the position at the college or the high school level. Things are going to be interesting. That's needless to say, the offense is going to need to get back on track in a big way. If Boykin is healthy, which, God, at this point, knock on wood, I feel good about our chances, but we are looking at a completely different outlook on the season as TCU fans.
Hey, Melissa, before I kick it to the guys, you were on the sidelines. You were right there for the Minnesota game, made the trip. And Minnesota's probably going to turn out to be what they've been the last couple of years. They're a good team. They're a fringe top 25 team, maybe more in the 25 to 40 range. They're going to lose 4 games, probably go 8-4. I think we've got them pinned down pretty well. So was that a good performance out of TCU, or did you expect more against a team that maybe you should beat up a little bit?
I think Minnesota's maybe a little bit better than we thought if they played defense to that level all year round. We know what we're getting from the quarterback. He's good. He's maybe average, slightly above average. He's not great. But they do have a great offensive line, and they have a very, very strong secondary. TCU left a lot of points on the board. Minnesota left some points on the board, too. But what we didn't see out of the Frogs was the ability to make one cut and go. They were trying to bounce at the outside, play sideline to sideline. Boykin was not accurate. Again, he hasn't practiced with Doxson basically the entirety of camp. Listenby never shook free because Minnesota was playing behind. I mean, they were just not letting the guys get past them. So credit to them for playing good defense. Maybe TCU's not 46 points a game this year. Maybe it was just game one. I think it's a little too early to make a snap judgment on that. But I will say very clearly, I think TCU didn't play near the level that they're capable of. And I think Minnesota maybe about topped out in that game. So all credit to them. They played a great game. But the Frogs have got to tighten things up and get their mojo back, really, from where they left off in January against Ole Miss.
I can tell Sean's ready to roll here. So
I'm just trying to read up on something, but I'm just checking out. You can keep going.
Robert, your thoughts about week 1?
Oh, wow. A lot of question marks. Overall, the Big 12 went out and, for the most part, won games. And a lot of OSU fans would say, hey, you win the game, you're on the road on a Thursday night against a MAC team. I'm not necessarily jumping on that bandwagon, but I think overall, look, they won games. But they're, Baylor's defense, we want to see what's going on there. Texas Tech's defense, what changes did they make? They made changes. I didn't see any. Kansas, what are you going to do if you're Beatty at Kansas? He's got his work cut out for him. I think the thing to tell with them is just their effort. If they come out, play hard, or they maybe have a chance in some games. But that failed spike of the ball at the end was just that was just world-class comedy, unfortunately for them. OU, who knows? They were on pay-per-view. You really didn't see anything. They played Akron. But OU, I think, might have a chance to suddenly look decent. I've got a lot of respect for Lincoln Riley. Baker Mayfield is definitely a serviceable quarterback for them. Outside of that, I mean, nobody really blew my socks off. I thought the TCU game, honestly, for me, the TCU game felt a lot like the game last year, except it was in Minnesota instead of Fort Worth. Yeah. So you switch a couple of scores one way or the other. So I remember coming out of that TCU game last year thinking, and then all of a sudden they're flying all over the place. So cross your fingers. I know what's happening with the defense because Oklahoma State didn't lose guys to injury, but they lost so many people a year ago to graduation, and I know what that does to a defense. So you cross your fingers that the offense is firing on all cylinders and Patterson can kind of work his magic. But I think coming out of week 1, there's just still a tremendous number of question marks. Texas is not looking good. Kansas is not looking good. K-State, what's going on there? They lost their starting quarterback second play of the game, but still kind of chugged along. I think this game this weekend at UTSA is going to be a kind of a telling game for them. So overall, really nothing to hang our hats on. We need to see a couple more. I think you really almost need to see conference play because nobody's playing anybody.
Sean, perfect. Exactly. That's always my point right there when it comes to breaking down these conferences. Sean,
Yeah.
I know less about this conference than any other Power 5 conference. If we look at the other four, I can say that was bad. This was great. This league went 8-2, and the two marquee games were TCU goes to Minnesota. They beat a decent team, but they were expected to win. I think 23-17 was a little bit closer than most people expected, but I also think TCU played better than 23-17. I think it could have gotten out of hand or been a more comfortable win, but Minnesota did have a shot late to pull off the upset. Notre Dame, Texas. If Notre Dame turns out to be a fringe college football playoff team, or at least a top 10 team, and Texas is truly the 6th, 7th best team in the Big 12, it's a bad loss, but it's not that bad because you would expect to lose big on the road against that good of a team. Now, if Texas turns out to be better and Notre Dame's really not that good, then it doesn't look good. But I can tell less from this conference play taking on the Power 5 and the other teams they did, because there were only 2 out of 10 games against the Power 5. So it's difficult for me to assess the Big 12 at this point.
I think even with us saying that we're versed in the conference, I still think we're still clueless with what's going on. Because honestly, I thought you were going to swing the question to us playing Lamar next week, which is, I'm honestly thinking 82-0. It's possible. Seth Russell looked phenomenal. He had like 50% completion percentage, but that was just some bad drop passes from Jay Lee, among others. But honestly, it's really up in the air, and it's going to be offense that thrives. Although TCU, like Melissa pointed out, it may not be 40 points a game, but we'll see. And Oklahoma-Tennesse is going to be the really, really big pivotal moment for the conference to see if we can get the boost back up in the rankings.
Exactly. So, Robert, if this league turns out to be what we expect it to be, it's still TCU despite Melissa flipping out and the losses that they're going to have to deal with on defense. If it's still TCU and Baylor as the class, Oklahoma State a dark horse, Oklahoma a dark horse, even though I picked them to win the league. If that's the expected play out, that it's TCU, Baylor still the dominant two, and then Oklahoma, well, not Texas anymore, Oklahoma State, maybe West Virginia, playing a good Georgia Southern team. They got them down 44-0. This Oklahoma-Tennessee game is huge because Oklahoma, let's say they go to Knoxville, they win impressively. Tennessee turns out to be pretty good in the SEC. Oklahoma comes back to the Big 12. TCU and Baylor put them in their place. Well, that's the big win that they can say, that they can translate out of conference and say, hey, we beat Oklahoma. This game, I think, is the biggest game on the map in terms of the Big 12 being able to make a statement down the road for the college football playoff.
Yeah, and I think we have to hope that Tennessee actually turns out to be, have a winning program this year. It all depends. Tennessee's got to look good going out. They weren't incredibly impressive beating Bowling Green. Bowling Green ran up a lot of yardage, got some points. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how Tennessee does down the road. OU, I think OU is kind of flying under the radar here and has a shot at being pretty decent. But as far as looking good and nationally speaking, I mean, you're right. This is a big game, but it would all hinge on how OU looks, and then how does Tennessee look the rest of the season. I mean,
it's the same with Minnesota.
Yeah.
Yeah, Minnesota could be a wild card that could turn out to be really good if they can knock off Nebraska and Wisconsin and play really good in the Big Ten West and get to a championship game or get close, maybe more like 10-2 or 9-3. More than what we expect. Minnesota turns out to be a really good win, although that seemed to be the wild card game that everybody was pointing to at the end of last year, comparing TCU and Ohio State. Even though TCU played the better game against Minnesota, it didn't turn out well. I want to hear about Oklahoma State, Robert, because there are folks out there during the offseason that were saying, hey, this is the dark horse team. This is a college football playoff team. Now, that might be a bit of a stretch, but if people around the country were looking to snatch that wild card team, they were one of the teams that came to mind. I don't know that we can play too much off of this week one. It looked close. It was close, but it was on the road, and it was against Central Michigan.
If we could have shown pictures of it, you would have seen this mass upchuck of the orange Kool-Aid. on that Thursday night. One of our biggest issues is the team has plenty of talent. The offensive line is obviously a question. They were very shaky in the first half. They looked better in the second half, but the biggest reason they looked better in the second half is because Gundy and our offensive coordinator Mike Yursich magically decided to open up the playbook after Central Michigan took the lead on the first drive of the second half. So there's been a tremendous amount of chatter this week about are they going to keep the playbook open. Gundy admitted in the press conference that they went in with a very conservative game plan, they said, because of inexperience in some positions. But then he comes back and he says that, well, we're not good enough to overlook any of these teams we play. And I come back with, well, if you're not good enough to overlook any of these teams, you're not good enough to hide your playbook. I mean, they hid their playbook on Thursday night on the road against an OK MAC team and found themselves trailing at the beginning of the third quarter. So I think there's a lot of rumbling that the talent is there. The wide receiver talent is incredible. I mean, I guarantee you, as far as talent in the Big 12, Baylor has the best wide receiver talent in the Big 12. Oklahoma State's right underneath them. These kids are very athletic. If Marcel Aitman comes around, he continues to perform. That guy's physically a tough match. They've got 2 or 3 guys playing this cowboy back, which is really kind of a hybrid tight end position. We got to see that playbook open up. The offense just didn't look like anything that was going to challenge for the Big 12 title. So we've got to see some more.
I think Melissa has something to say about wide receiver talent. I don't think she's going to concede Baylor and Oklahoma State.
You know, it's tough because I do think TCU has as good a group of wide receivers as there is in the conference, but Josh Doxson, I think is one of the most complete wide receivers in the country. But he's banged up. He's not 100%, and when he fell below 100% last year, he wasn't the same weapon. Now, he had a really good game against Minnesota. He was a leading receiver for the Frogs, but he's clearly not himself. He's not able to kind of shake loose and get deep quite yet. Deontay Gray is a question mark. He's been hurt. He blew out his knee last year in non-contact, the dreaded non-contact knee injury. So Patterson is saying he's physically healthy, but he's not mentally there, and that is 90% of the battle at this point for the kid. So if he can get right, he changes our offense. But what was really encouraging to me, despite the wide receiver depth that we have, is that Sean Nixon, who is a freshman who's recovering from injury, was really dynamic in the receiving game. Kyle Hicks was another one who is a running back, caught quite a few balls. And then Kevontae Turpin might be an X factor for TCU, along with Desmond White, the shifty, tiny little guys that can play in the slot and make people miss.
Hey, Sean, can you give me some reason to watch any other game in the Big 12? Have you looked at this schedule? So the 2 I'm going to throw out as possibilities, I guess, I'm going to make a big stretch here. If Iowa does something in the Big 10, which they're not expected to do, but Iowa State has played even with Iowa, and I know that Iowa's nothing right now or very little, but if you go back 5 or 6 years, perennial top 25 team. Won the Orange Bowl 5 or 6 years ago, and Iowa State has split the last 10 with Iowa. That really shouldn't happen, but that's another discussion. They beat them last year, and if Iowa State can do that again, come back to the Big 12 again by connection, and if Iowa plays well in the Big 10, maybe they do something there. Memphis and Kansas. Kansas also plays Rutgers. They actually have one of the tougher Big 12 schedules out of conference, playing Rutgers and Memphis. That's going to be a difficult game for the Jayhawks based on what we saw last week. So give me some kind of are you going to watch any of these other games, Sean?
Well, I'm going to watch whatever I can. I was flipping channels all weekend, so I'm going to try to channel surf with those. But, of course, I do like the Memphis and Kansas game. I like what Kansas is doing, and I think South Dakota State being an FCS team, they were vastly underrated for whatever reason. They came in, I think, as the number 13 in the nation as the FCS school, and they had a great quarterback, great wide receiver duo. I like that, but Memphis is a great running team, and we're going to see how Kansas's really inexperienced defense can hold up with them. But going back to your original team, Iowa versus Iowa State, I don't look as much about conference versus conference, Big 10, Big 12. I looked at it as for the future, because a lot of people were pounding down on Iowa State for being fairly bad for the last few years and Paul Rhodes being on the hot seat. If they can win it again this year over Iowa, I really think they have a chance of swinging the state in their favor with their basketball team emerging and a possibility of their football team emerging too. They could start getting recruits in the Midwest. I mean, they really only have Wisconsin and Minnesota playing into them. Iowa's really falling down. So if Iowa State can start getting those recruits from their state, they could start rising within the Big 12, and it's looking hopeful for the Big 12 to look a little bit better for everyone else.
I love it. Sean giving us some vision down the road for Iowa State's emergence. This is good stuff. Robert, since you weren't around for the last few weeks, we got Melissa's take and Sean's take on, number one, the Power 5 situation. We know what happened to the Big 12 last year. Just your thoughts about how strong this conference is. Number one, how strong do you think it is in reality? Number two, what's the perception of the conference, do you believe, nationally?
I think the perception of the conference nationally is if you said the Power 5, I could be wrong. I'm thinking nationally they think we're 4 or 5. Honest to goodness. The conference as a whole doesn't play enough marquee games out of conference, number one. I think as far as what happens this year, and we saw what happened last year, I'm a firm believer this year that is, if it's not TCU or Baylor, I think TCU and or Baylor could get away with one loss and still make the playoff, potentially, depending on, obviously, on what happens, with the other highly ranked teams. I think the only other team in the conference that could potentially make the playoff and get away with one loss would be Oklahoma. But it's going to be tough. They're going to have to come out and start just ripping people right and left, like Baylor would, or, you're just going to have to start blowing people out right and left. If it's any other team in the conference, one loss, you're done. You're not ranked high enough. There's no way to work your way up the standings and kind of get, into the picture unless you lose early maybe, and then you start blowing people out and having big wins. But I think for the conference, perception right or wrong, we got to get some more marquee games in the non-conference schedule. Got to.
Baylor, Kansas State.
No, Oklahoma State can't say anything.
Oklahoma State. You did play Florida State last year, but you gotta get somebody to play each and every year. I think TCU's got some Ohio State dates coming up several years down the road, maybe.
A couple of years. Ohio State, Arkansas, Cal, Stanford. TCU's future schedule. I've got some fun vacations coming up.
Wow.
Yeah, that's good stuff. You know who actually schedules like that, but they're not a factor, is Texas. Texas schedules tougher than anyone outside of the conference, but they've been lousy for 3 or 4 years. All right, this is a great discussion. Love it every Wednesday, 8 o'clock Central Time, 9 o'clock Eastern, Big 12 Breakdown, and I bring on the best bloggers in the Big 12 this week with Melissa Triebwasser of Frogs O' War, Sean Cordy from Today's You, and also from SB Nation's Cowboys Ride for Free, Robert Whetsell. So I'll give you guys a parting shot if you want it. Otherwise, another great discussion. Next week, I believe we'll have some better football games to talk about. Anybody?
All right, so if there's any silver lining to the whole debacle of TCU's defense, it's that Gary Patterson could get a second straight Coaching of the Year award.
I appreciate that. I'm going to hold on to that one here for the next couple of weeks.
There you go.
I'm glad we're getting to go home. Just pray for Kelsey Patterson right now, because I would not want to live in the same house as Gary at the moment.
No.
Good
I'll say this. That is as good as everybody can be, and the coaching can be great, the recruiting can be great. What's happened with TCU, what happened with Kansas State, you can see how just some unfortunate, business, some unfortunate stuff. You hope kids are okay, but some key injuries, and the whole thing can go up in smoke like that.
At the end of the day, they're 18-year-old kids, man. You just don't know what you're going to get out of them, health-wise, mental health-wise, all of that. They're just kids.
Yeah, but we're going to have to wait a couple more weeks for good football, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are injuries in every sport, but we all love football. That's why we're all sitting here on a Wednesday night talking about it. But it ends very quickly for some athletes, and it's tough to watch after all that weightlifting, film watching, two-a-days and everything, and then they go out there week one, and a lot of good players across the nation lost on this opening weekend. So, again, it's Sean, it's Robert, it's Melissa. Thanks so much for joining us, of course, for Big 12 Breakdown. We'll see you next week.
Awesome.
Yeah, be healthy.